Hello and welcome to this bonus episode of Pulp Kitchen.
Welcome.
We've not really done a bonus episode before. We've done spoiler episodes. We've done
extra stuff.
But this is an official, proper bonus episode. This entire episode is going to be about Richard Linklater's The Before Trilogy. Now, anyone who's been listening to the show for a long time will know that these films have come up in discussion for a long time on my behalf. James has not seen them, but he had not seen them. And we found over the past year that we would be talking about different topics in different films, but I kept wanting to bring them up because they were relevant for so many different reasons. So James very diligently and very kindly has gone away and done his homework and watched the films, and much persistence from me. Okay, we're very busy. I appreciate you doing that. And so now James has seen these films. We can come together and talk about them in a spoiler way. So if you are listening to this and you haven't seen the Before Trilogy, you can keep listening if you want, but there will be spoilers. If you haven't, go away and listen to it and come back and have a deep discussion with us. But what is the Before Trilogy? Why have I been banging on about it? What's the dealio? So, the Before Trilogy is Before Sunrise, Before Sunset, and Before Midnight. Before Sunrise was made in 1995, Before Sunset in 2004, and Before Midnight in 2013. Now, it's each one directed by Richard Linklater and starring Ethan Hawke and Julie Delpy. The important thing to always point out when you're talking about the Before Trilogy is that it was never intended to be a trilogy. They made the first one, and then only through the years later, the cast and director stayed in contact. Thought, what would you do if you want to? Should we actually return to? And they returned with a sequel, and that was it. They did Before Sunset, and same thing again. 9 years later, they thought, actually, I wonder where we could pick up with that, and then they had the third one. So, brief description of the plot. Before Sunrise is, obviously it's in contemporary period. It's in the mid-90s. You have a train going to from Budapest to Vienna, and the film opens with this old couple, middle-aged couple, arguing on the train, and it causes Julie Delpy, who's there, who's young, early 20s, probably about 23, to move carriages, and she sits in this carriage against the window, and across from her is Ethan Hawke, an American tourist interrailing on his own around Europe, and they sort of catch each other's eye, and they sort of strike up a conversation, and they end up spending the remainder of the train ride together chatting. Now, Julie Delpy's character is going beyond Vienna. She's getting off somewhere else. I can't remember her final destination. Oh, no, she's on the way to Budapest, to see her grandmother, I think.
Right, okay.
Sorry, I can't... Yeah.
I should remember really. I don't.
But they've had this really, a good few hours of conversation between them. But they pull into Vienna where Ethan Hawke is getting off. And as they're waiting in the station, Ethan Hawke comes back to her, Julie Delpy's character, who's called Celine. I'm sorry, I should call them their characters' names. Comes back to Celine, and Ethan Hawke plays Jesse. And Jesse says, listen, now this is kind of crazy, but look, I fly out of Vienna tomorrow, and I've got nothing to do, I've got no plans, I'll just be on my own, and I'll just be waiting for a flight to take off. And look, I know this is strange, but you and I, we've had a really good conversation, we've had a really good connection. Would you be interested in just getting off the train with me and just hanging out with me for 24 hours before I have to catch my flight? And, he says that, if you really don't like it, you can just get back on a train straight away. But and she's kind of intrigued, and she's kind of, surprised. And she says, okay, sure, let me get my bag. And they get off the train. And so it begins Before Sunrise, a film about those two together. Now, we'll get to the other two films afterwards, but that is the vague setup. You have these sort of European set, dialogue-heavy films made between... with the same crew. And the first film was written by Linklater and Kim Krisen, and then the second one was Linklater, but also Delpy and Hawke writing as well in the same way in Before Midnight. Anyway, that's the kind of overview. That's what it is. And we've been wanting to do this episode because when we were talking about strange things, it could be about how you as a viewer change your relationship with films over time, or what a film has to do with dialogue, or what it says about relationships. And each time I'd have to go, well, actually, that reminds me of the Before films. Anyway, that's the overview. We're going to get into it. But James, just because you and I have not talked about it, you've just said to me, I've watched this now. As an overview, what do you want to tell me? How should we go with this conversation? Should I be worried or?
So I did watch them obviously in order. I watched them with my partner,
yes.
Which again, perfect film,
Absolutely.
Perfect series of films to watch with your partner because you are engaging and watching them. Now I've seen all three. I'm like, this demands a rewatch.
Yes.
Which is really frustrating because now I've taken like 3 months to watch them. But now I've come to the end of that. I'm like, well, now it's kind of like finishing The Prestige. I need to now use everything how that's ended to reinforce what I now think of the beginning.
Which is funny, like I said, because it was never intended to be a trilogy.
And on that, it's so clear. I would have loved to have been watching it in '95 and have the way these films end, which is kind of, on a cliffhanger, I guess, right?
Each one ends really ambiguously.
Very ambiguously, and it's ambiguous, but also you take in your own idea of relationships and love, and that really informs whether or not you think X and Y will happen. And I would have loved to have had to wait. I would have loved to have sat with it in real time. I've loved to have been at a different age and different periods of my life to have watched it. But, here we are. I think, the first one, it was interesting watching, because I watched 2 and 3 quite closely together. And it was interesting to see how differently those films look and feel. And I realized that obviously they're aware of the fact this has taken place over many, many different years. They're aware of the fact how storytelling has changed. One really felt like you were experiencing a memory. And the way in which it ends is so clearly trying to show you like the scrap pages of a memory and something that's now going to endure forever, even though you had your moment there, that will still be there. I feel like the second one felt like something that could have happened to me a couple of years ago. The third one felt like an argument I had last night. Do you know what I mean? It really felt like I think it's totally intentional, and I really enjoyed them, and I enjoy talking about them, and it was great to watch it with my partner. And it's another thing why I want to rewatch it is that a lot of the film is long, uncut dialogue scenes. And obviously what it's known for is its incredible dialogue, and they cover politics, life, philosophy, true love, feminism, all of these different things. And we've actually made a joke to each other when we were about to watch the third, and it was like, oh God, I can't wait for 2 hours for these two characters to somehow find ways to talk about the meaning of life, things in just like a very short window. Yes, it's clearly got these very long dialogue scenes, and there are lots of points where it's a 2-shot, and the film doesn't force you to look at one person for a very specific reason. It's in a 2-shot, and one time in the second film, Talia goes to me, which person are you watching? And I said, right now I'm watching Celine, but I was watching Jessie.
He's in the taxi.
And it was both. Yeah. It was actually both. It was actually just him walking through Paris, and I was like, I'm watching Celine at the moment because what I think is brilliant about this film is that you get very distracted watching one person because, yes, you want to see the way that they deliver the lines, but the way they receive the other person's lines is just as deep and just as interesting. But because I'm watching Jessie for this period, I feel like I'm missing out on Celine and vice versa, hence why I need a rewatch.
Brilliant. I mean, I love that. First, so I'm glad you clearly understood. Can you understand why I wanted you to watch them?
Yes, of course,
And that comes on to a point I'll probably talk more about later, which is that, like, in terms of why these films are inherently cinematic to me, like cinema is often thought about blowing things up big, Nolan-esque, Kubrick-esque, let's take something and spectacle, and I totally get that. But film similarly can equally be a microscope, and I feel like with these films show is that you
even
can,
in romance as well, you can make spectacle.
You can deadly focus on what you pick up on and magnify is the minute details of a human experience.
How that makes you feel.
So let's begin with Before Sunrise then. So like I said, it's the summer of 94, they say. It comes out in 95. And
this year I felt like I did the unofficial Before tour because I did Vienna, I did Paris with my girlfriend, and then I kind of did Catalonia, which is sort of Greece, which are really similar. So I had done. So it's recent. And some of the streets in Paris that they had walked, I'd literally done. So like when that cafe by the Shakespeare Book Company, we had a coffee there and then walked down, and then the park they walked through, I'd walked down. Anyway, sorry.
Okay, but like I said, Before Sunrise, so Jessie and Celine, they get off the train and they start talking. And like you said, they're talking about love, romance, philosophy, death, femininity, gender. It's just a huge wide range of effortless
conversation. They cover a comic amount of stuff.
And, the conversation moves. There's an extended scene where they're in a tram and the camera's just fixed. And they have this long conversation about Jesse's his character always is thinking about very big ideas about how you can divide a soul and like big thinking, whereas Celine's interested in like smaller observations and about relationships and stuff and people. Anyway, you get these moments. I mean, there are scenes in the first one I think stands out as the most like just conventionally romantic, right? And you have there's a bit where they like walk past a street poet, and so there's this is what's great. You have this conventionally romantic scene where you walk past a street poet, says, "Oh, I'll write a poem for you," or whatever, and Celine, gives him a word, and he does that, and then but what's interesting is afterwards you get the classic cynical American against the sort of romantic European between them.
He just is a structure. He just writes the poem.
And the funny thing is about Jesse in Before Sunrise is that like he is, I think, intentionally and almost like affectionately obnoxious. There's a part of him when I'm like, the thing is,
I liked him more as he grew up.
Yes, me too. But I'm like, but his obnoxiousness is so tied to his age at that point.
Yeah.
And I like the fact that, yes, he's sort of like very intelligent, but slightly cynical and a bit brash as an American. But he's then completely dumbfounded by this European angel that Celine represents.
He's almost like a male fantasy, on the verge of male fantasy figure, like go to Europe and find someone like that.
But for her as well, Celine is like incredibly intelligent, almost like hyper, almost bordering on neurotic, but not neurotic. But like she's angry and frustrated, and like she gets pressure from her parents. And Jesse
emotionally
to her,
political,
exactly.
Really
but Jesse to her represents this kind of like he's free from the kind of almost conservatism of like her French upbringing. So look, there's some scenes that are great. There's the Ferris wheel scene. I loved. Did you like the listening booth scene in the first one? That bit where they go and it's completely silent and they're looking at each other for a moment to like, they play that song and it's all about like, come here, like kiss me. And they're trying to catch each other eye, but they keep looking away at the wrong time. So Jesse will look at Celine, and then just as he looks back, she looks back at him. He'll
Classic
look away,
movie,
and it's just like this palpable, like romantic tension, right? Is there any moments in the first one that struck you that you want to pull out?
I really like the pinball scene when they're both like taking turns, like just trading and overlapping all of these different moments in time. The tram, especially, like coming through that, and it's like Jesse in the first one. I think, as you said, like he grew on me more as a character. Becomes quite sympathetic in the last one, but in the first one, he's so like a young puppy of like trying to try all these new things, and he's full of big ideas, and he doesn't really know about how much that could offend people. And it's interesting to contrast it with the second one, when he's much more like, I don't want to reveal that, and vulnerable.
He's so almost overconfident.
He becomes more tragic
because the events have a toll on him of what happens.
Yes, and then she literally talks about like the frown lines in his face in number 2, and it's like, it's interesting, like you look different from that. Specific moments in one.
I mean, I'll just say that what the first one sets up and all the films do is that there's the running theme of these films is about time. And if you had to sum up what these 3 films are about, apart from being about love and relationships, it's about the ephemerality of life.
Yeah.
About how nothing is ever permanent, everything is transitory, nothing is fixed. And you have, in a trilogy that spans 20 years, each film is like hyper fixed to one specific time frame. I mean, the second one in particular plays out basically in real time.
Yeah.
It's like there's no time gap between the scenes.
It's like almost 2 hours of like just live conversation.
Yeah. Well, actually, though, it's worth saying these films are. The first, number 2 is about 82 minutes long. And then the first one's 90 minutes. The second one's about 100, I think. And then so in the first one, they start to develop this theme, and it's obviously like they know they've got this countdown until Jesse has to leave it in the morning, and Celine talks about how she looks at her life like it's a memory from her older years. And when Jesse convinces Celine to get off the train, he says, like, I'm a time traveler. I've come back from the future when you're old and married. And I want to tell you that you should get off the train. And then there's the bit towards as dawn is breaking. Vienna looking beautiful as the dawn rises. Stunning. And Jesse quotes that W.H. Auden poem about like how time is just fleeting. So there's this undercurrent of like tragedy, the tragedy of time, but the beauty of time.
And it's not as much of an issue for them in the beginning, but when they come back 9 years later and they have technically lost time, there's so many incredible quotes which come really relevant, very relevant to me now. I'm like in my late 20s, which I know isn't old, but like, time has passed. There are so many good quotes, but there's one of my favorites, which is, I guess,
this number 2, is it?
I think this is number 2, which is, I guess when you're young, you just believe there'll be many people with whom you'll connect with. Later in life, you realize it only happens a few times.
Yeah.
And it's that idea that like, oh, I won't say yes to going to the pub with my friends. I can go any week. But sometimes like someone leaves or someone moves or someone dies. Yeah. And I'm like, actually, if you count on a hand, I only had like 5 more times to ever go to the pub with that person when I said I didn't want to go. And it's so true of life. And it's one of those things that when you now, because they're losing time, and in the third one, when they've lost time and they're like having that argument about where they should be and who they should be and what they should do, it just... it really captures something that I don't think a lot of films have.
I mean, just a bit more on the first one is that a scene I love is the obviously the famous the fake call they do in the they cut to this. It's not a diner, obviously it's a Viennese cafe, but very late in the night, early morning. And there's a brief moment where, so Jesse and Celine are sat in this booth, but they cut away to other people in the cafe. And it's like this hint that everyone else is having their own story that night. And there's a brief, really funny moment where they go on to like an American couple and you just hear the guy say, I mean, you just wouldn't get the service in America. It's unbelievable. It's really funny. And then you cut back and Jesse and Celine do this thing where they say, you know, like, if you had to call your roommate or your best friend about the journey you've had, what would it be like? And they do this like improv bit where they call a fake call and they're like tring tring, and that's just really playful. And when you mentioned the word about Jesse being a puppy, that kind of like playfulness is really in there. And Celine is very cat-like, actually.
Yeah, very cat-like.
And then she literally has a cat in the second one. So it's like there's this feline coyness to her that like she likes to be played with. She thinks she likes to be loved. And this is the thing she talks about in the second one. Even though she's so confident, she absolutely wants to be an independent person, but she's like Joe March in Little Women. She doesn't want to, but she doesn't want to be alone.
It becomes really relevant in the third one.
So, and then before Sunrise, so it's conventionally romantic, and there's a bit towards the end I love where they show all the spaces they've been in, but now that they're empty, and again it's the idea of like transitory and transientness and passing through.
The location enduring beyond your lifetime, but the memories that people have there, for some people, I mean, a really unassuming back road you would look at and be like, well, that's just an unassuming side road, but to someone, that little bench where you had that conversation or that place that you sat means the world to you.
And just before I forget, there's an interesting, I don't know what this means, but there's an interesting detail in each one where in the first one they go to the graveyard and there's a rabbit in the corner and they go, oh look, there's a rabbit. And then in the second one, when it's with Jesse's Celine's apartment, she's like, oh, here's my kitty, I love my kitty. And in the third one there's like a dog or something they see walk and goes, oh look, there's a dog. I don't know what it means, but there's always like an animal just out of shot.
Oh look, an animal.
Anyway, so then Before Sunrise ends, and it's like, like you've got the beauty of time and the tragedy of time, that they've had this beautiful moment and beautiful 24 hours, and they've kissed, and they've it's unsure what they've done, but we later find in the second one that they slept together
twice.
Yeah, exactly. But you get beautiful, romantic, and they're just completely in love with each other. But they have to go, and they're at the train station, and this is when I was like,
the height of romance.
Yeah, and you're like, Jesus, train platform, this like brief encounter. I'm like, and you're getting that tension, and they're like, and Jesse says, well, look,
this connection is special. What do we do?
What do we do? And they said, like, let's just meet back here in 6 months. If we still feel the same way, let's meet back here in 6 months, and we'll do it. And it's the first time they've spoken about this idea, and then they kiss and they say goodbye, and Celine gets on the train and she sits down, and Jesse goes back, and you get these like counter shots of Jesse on the bus to the airport and Celine on the train away, and like you say, it's this kind of idea that, was that all a dream?
And that's the most grand romantic style sweeping part of the whole series.
Well,
and it's pretty like, what's your Instagram handle? It could only have happened at that,
which becomes relevant in the third one when they're confronted with a younger couple.
Why did we exchange information? Like, why did we do that?
So you're right. And the films are not marked by like sweeping grandeur of romance, right? Are they?
No, not at all. I mean, we'll go on. They become more and more realistic. But on that ending, when you've got films or stories that end like that, I'm almost like, well, God damn it, they made another one. I'm so glad they did, because it's fantastic. But I'm almost like, going back to that plot, because you finish that and you turn to your friend you saw it with and you go, God, I wonder what's going to happen. And you go, oh, well, they'll meet up. And you go, well, hang on, like life gets in the way. You might go, I don't think they'll meet up. They're not right for each other. What do you mean? They're perfect for each other. Fleeting moment. I'm like, yeah, but when you're young, you meet people and you probably will. And you can have that conversation. Obviously, I knew there was going to be 2 and 3. But when you do that to a story and you leave on that note and you leave it open to the audience, by making another one, you inherently take something special away from that film. Of course, you can watch it and you can go, oh, I love that ending. And like you can still wonder.
What you mean, particularly with the second and the third one.
Well, it's not a criticism. I'm just saying, like, the way that stories end like that you do, something is lost from the mystery. And I would have loved, as I said, to have been there in 95 and to have just sat with it and not knowing they were going to make another one.
I mean, I see what you mean. Like, that's why when I was telling you to watch these, I was like, don't read up on the third one as well. It's like, you don't look at what that is, because it'll kind of spoil it in a way.
Yes.
So, Before Sunrise ends, and And it's this film, and there is a parallel universe where that is the only film they made of this series, and people would look back and go, "Well, that was a nice film, very romantic and different."
The poster for the first one, also a byproduct of the '90s, but it's sepia sweeping Vienna Cathedral in the background, lying in each other's arms, and it's so glossy and romantic and shiny. And you look at the new ones, and it's different.
So there you kind of get like it's like a romantic, but very like it's not a rom-com. It's a intellectually you feel kind of nourished intellectually because you feel like you've had a good conversation. When I was 20, when I first watched this, I was like, I just want to join in their conversation. I just want to be part of it. And then you have this time gap as well. And then, so that was Before Sunrise. And then, like I said, 9 years later, they come back with Before Sunset, which if I had to pick personally, is my favorite.
Me too.
Of them all, because of the architecture it makes in the trilogy. And, so
the final like 10 minutes, I also think is just brilliant.
Yeah,
we'll get to it.
So Before Sunset, it's 9 years later, and Jesse, who had talks about in the first one as being, he wanted to be a writer, and it's clear that Jesse's creative. And in fact, in each one of the films, there's a bit at the beginning where Jesse talks about an idea he has. In the first one, he talks about the videotapes. He goes, "Yeah, I had this idea. You ever thought about that?" Yeah. Right? He always talks about an idea of the first one's about videotapes, and the second one it's about an idea he has for a book, and in the third one it's about another idea he has. And also, he talks about in the first one about the ghost of his grandmother or something, and then like his other grandmother dies. Anyway, so Before Sunset begins, and Jesse has actually become a writer. He has actually gone and written, and guess what? He's written a book about his experience in Before Sunrise called This Time.
Which makes sense because it's the most romantic idea, and he's like explored it and unpacked it. Like you're writing a book about 2 and 3 would be completely different types of things.
And so the film opens, and Jesse is in the Shakespeare and Company bookstore, Parisian, where James Joyce,
Notre Dame,
and people put it where that's where James Joyce's Ulysses first went on sale, and that's another sort of perambulating, walking kind of story that, anyway.
Didn't go in this year. Queues were like round the corner.
Oh, really? I really want to go. Anyway, so, and he's giving a talk there, and he's talking about his book, and he's being interviewed by the French press. And this happens for like 5 minutes. And as he's talking, he just looks to his side, and Celine is stood like off the wings of behind some of the bookshelves, just looking at him and smiling. And he's sort of dumbstruck. And in this time, by the way, we've had little flashbacks of Before Sunrise flash up on the screen. And then so the crowds disperse, and straight away the guy says to him, "You've got to catch a plane, remember?" And he's like, yeah, but give me the driver's number and stuff. And one thing I really love about this film is how tense it is, actually. For me, and it almost becomes unbearable. So the clock is set from the beginning. Like you have to catch
pretty
a
much
plane.
In real time. It takes place over like 2 hours.
He's on the end of this book tour, and he has to fly back to the US, and he's been told like your flight leaves soon. He says, "Okay, but give me the driver's number. I've got a bit of time, right?" He's like, "Yes, you've got a bit of time, but you need to." Anyway, and he goes over and speaks to Celine, and like, hey, and it's the first time. Well, you're aware that they're speaking to each other, and it's the first time they've spoken.
Do you know, for a split second when that happened, I was almost like, Is this even happening? I wondered for a very brief, like 20-minute period. I was like, is this just now like what would be Jesse's dream, that in the successful signing, press for his book, the woman he's been obsessing about for that many years turns up. I was like, is this all in his head, or is he writing his fantasy sequel that hasn't happened
But this is why the plot of the second one is really interesting, because I think the tagline was, what if you got a second chance with the one that got away?
Right.
And it is like this almost miracle moment, but it's a test. It's like a biblical test where it's like, here you go. Here's that person you've been talking about, thinking about for 9 years, but you've got 90 minutes
to do it.
To decide whether it's... And so they get talking, and he sort of says, hey, hello, let's go for coffee. And
it's awkward at first, right?
Yeah, but it's awkward, but also the way they look at each other is so like complex in there, because they have great affection. They're full of memories for each other.
So much unsaid. There's the awkwardness over like, who went, who didn't, why didn't you go?
Very quickly, Celine says, it transpires that Jesse did go.
Yeah, but he didn't admit it at first.
And Celine did.
And he's like, no, I didn't. I'm so glad we both didn't, right?
And then they were like, they're like, why didn't we exchange phone numbers? And they say, we were so stupid and young.
It's kind of addressing a plot hole in the first one.
But then they do say this, like, maybe it would have fizzled out if we'd written to each other, which is a legitimate thing. But the way they look, there's a clear attraction, there's a clear chemistry. But there's the awkwardness of the time difference that they didn't see each other. There's the awkwardness quite early on that they go to a cafe and they have a classic Jesse and Celine conversation. They catch up, and as you say, she says, "You've got a wrinkle in your thing," and look older. And you're right, Jesse's different now. He's
so
more
different,
slightly more timid, slightly jaded. I think by the fact that
unhappy marriage. He's had
that's
a kid.
it. We realize he's married. Yeah, he's got a kid which he loves, but he's longing. He's longing for this thing that happened in the past, which we unpack in the third one as might be a product of a male fantasy of you've lost this ideal in the past, right?
You got married as kind of like a happenstance. And I think also like conservative American ideas over marriage and like settling down might have affected him, and she represents the opposite of that.
Yes. And so he's sort of like unhappily married, but he's got this son that he loves, but he's tight, and the way that cafe scene at the beginning happens, and she's like bright and sparkly. She's like really happy. She's killing it in her career.
Completely fell in love with her.
Yeah, I know.
Impossible not to.
And the way that he like looks at her, it's so beautiful because you can tell he just absolutely adores her.
Yeah.
And he cannot believe she's there. And he says like, "Can you believe it was 9 years ago we were walking around with each other and you're there in front of me?"
And they're like straight back into it about like, what have you been doing and where are you working? And she's doing really exciting stuff with like humanitarian work, which makes so much sense for her. I'm like, of course you're doing that. And and
then so proceeds, and they say, well, she's like they finish the cafe, and she says, well, again, but haven't you got a flight to catch? She says, no, but I want to keep talking to you.
Fine, we can go.
And so begins the classic before trait of they walk around the city, and they walk and perambulate and talk, and again, it's the idea of time. Jesse says, but this is real, this is happening now. My God, tell me about you. What's going on? And the dream logic thing again is this a dream? And they chat with each other. It's a little bit flirtatious, and then
there's an awkward physical moment where Jessie,
on the park bench,
she kind of misreads the situation at some point.
Yeah, and he also they start to talk briefly about sex a little bit. And it's like,
and she does like kind of typical woman thing, right? Where she like denies the fact that they had sex at first
because
he's like, what do you mean you don't remember that?
Because obviously she's read his book. She's aware that his book, and so something that happened to her has now been fictionalized and put out there for other people to read.
His voice and not hers.
So she says, well, I don't agree with your perspective that we didn't sleep together. And he's like, yeah, my God, we did. And then obviously she comes out later and says, yes, we slept together twice. But increasingly, it starts to begin when they're on the barge along the Seine, and they go past Notre Dame, and the conversation is almost getting a little bit tenser. Not just because we are aware that Jesse's got to catch this flight, but it's like, you're aware of Jesse's desperation, that his life is not happening as it should, and you're aware of her. She's had some flawed relationships that have failed away, and she's still single. And then there's my favorite scene in it. I remember the last time I watched it, which was at Somerset House, and they did a double bill, and it was like pissing down the rain, and it got to this scene when they get in a taxi together, and it like spills over into this basically an argument. And I find it so uncomfortable. My girlfriend could tell. She has to like tap me on the leg and be like, "It's okay," because you've got these people that like they care for each other so much. And she's like, "You wrote this book about me, and how dare you?" And like all these men, they keep having relationships and moving on from me. And like I'm so annoyed. And like how could you? And she basically admits like, "Yes, I have thought about you as well. Like obviously." And he says like, "I have these dreams about you where like I see your face going by in a train, and then I wake up sobbing, and you're just aware like." The tragedy, like, oh my God, these two people who aren't together. A
great moment where he's like, I swear to God, I was in New York and I really thought I saw you, and I almost like stopped the car, and then you realize that she actually was in New York for like a period, I think it's like 1 or 2 years.
Yes.
And it's just like, Jesse's just like, he doesn't say it, but he knows his head, he's like, oh fuck, like we were in the same place and in the same city for a period of time.
Yeah.
I love that idea.
And he says as well, again, he brings it up on the barge where he's like, why weren't you there in Vienna? Why couldn't you have been there? I mean, she couldn't go because the grandmother that she was visiting dies, so she had to spend time with her.
And the idea of her disliking the way that she's been portrayed comes up again in the third one.
Very
she's asked her, someone's like, we'll get to it, like, oh, you wrote this, I love your books. Oh my God, are you her? Are you the Celine? Would you mind signing this too? And she feels really awful, like signing it and validating this interpretation, which feels true to herself.
And then the scene in the cab I love, and there's this moment which someone put together in a GIF, which I love, where Jesse is like saying, "Look, I'm sorry, but I have these dreams. I really care for you." And she like tenderly like tries to reach for to stroke his hair, but she doesn't quite do it. She pulls back, and it mimics the exact scene. It's shot in the exact same way from the first one, where Jesse goes to stroke her hair when they're on the tram in Vienna.
Yeah.
and then you arrive at, and they kind of clear the air, and it's fine, and like she admits that they did sleep together, and like they clearly have thought about each other. So then you just have this thing in the air that like these two people care about each other. They're so glad to each other, have this connection. And like this is now like the driver's like calling him like, you have to go to the airport.
And it's not an obvious connection like they're the same person and they're so similar, because that would be too obvious or too like much of a trope of romance. The fact is that they are like yin and yang, and they disagree on so much. But like it's the fact that they are so enriched by each other is what makes the connection special.
I also think the fact that Jesse is married is such a clever narrative decision, because it means you are conflicted as an audience. You can't be like, just go with her. It's like, but you have commitment because life gets in the way.
It would have been easy to be like, I was married, but she died of cancer, and now I'm alone, thinking of our time.
It's awkward. And he has this love for his son to come first. And they arrive at Jesse's apartment, and she's mentioned that she plays guitar, and he says, look, he's got the driver there. He says, would you just,
where do you live? 14th? Okay, yeah, no, we can take her, that's fine.
And we'll go up, so it's not the cab, it's the driver that drives, isn't it?
Because then they're in his,
and then they say, let's, she says, I'll take you upstairs. And
take you on the way.
Play one song.
I knew it was like when she said, it's like, no, I'll walk you up. And the cab driver knows.
Yeah. But there's a bit as well when they get out when like, she hugs him and just says, hey, look, you're going to go soon. And like, I just wanted to hug you. And like the way his face is like, he just doesn't want the hug to stop.
Yeah.
And eventually she says, okay, I'll come and play you one song, but you have to get this played. And he's like, yeah, sure. And they walk up the stairs and it's dead silence. For me, that was exact callback to like the listening booth scene, the first one, of this sexual tension. And it's not uncomfortable necessarily, but it's just,
unspoken,
it's very pregnant.
Kind of what's going to happen. As you said, the tension to that point, I'm like, he's not fucking getting back at that cab. He's not catching that. Like, well, depends on how you think about it.
Of course, And then they go up to her apartment.
Can we just talk about the apartment?
I know.
Oh my
gorgeous boho Parisian
we
apartment.
Paused it. We're like, oh my God. Look at all that like slate art, like the book stacked high with like a cup of tea on it. Adored it.
It's so
no
silly.
TV.
Yeah.
No TV. Loved it.
Then so they put on, they talk about music. She makes some tea and she plays a song. She's okay, I did write a song. And I said, you said one song. And then she plays him the song, and she's written a song about him in the same way that he wrote a book.
Yeah.
And you almost get, like I said, she's been very coy and like feline and holding back. And in this final bit of the film, she in this song, in her own Celine way, admits that he meant a lot to her. And he sings, let me tell you about this night with you, Jesse. And it ends, and then like Jesse's like got this, he's like beaming.
He literally cannot stop.
He's
like, oh my God.
Yeah. And she says, okay, do you want to make some tea? And then they put Nina Simone on, they're talking.
She kind of drops like, you're probably not getting on that plane.
No, that's the final line.
No, I know, but she says it a little bit before, I think.
She? Yeah.
And then she says it again when she's dancing, and she's like,
I love it.
You're not getting on that plane.
And like he's just watching her and she's just dancing and talking about unrelated stuff about Nina Simone.
Again, would have been too obvious to have shown them having sex or like get like collapsing to each other's arms.
But when I first watched it, I thought that was an ambiguous. I still didn't think. I just thought, what is happening? Like what's going? And because it ends so abruptly, she just goes, "Baby."
Again, I was still towards that point, being like, someone's gonna tap Jesse on the shoulder and be like, come on, and he's got to stop writing his perfect reenact. I was almost wondering, I was like, do I criticize this for being a male power fantasy? No, because it's earned itself in conversation. But I was like, it did feel dreamlike. That's the second one feels like that. The first one feels like a memory. The second one feels like a dream fantasy.
And the third one is reality.
It's a reality. It's an argument. And the way you remember the third one feels like it's an argument I could have had the night before. But
so there's just to clear, the second one ends and she just says, baby, you are going to miss that plane. He goes, I know.
And she's kind of like dancing.
And it just
really
fades
hot,
to black.
And
I love that as an ending. And it just looks such a great ending. And I know people who have, one of my friends watched that one first. And I said, why'd you do that? He said, you know what? I don't know why. But he said, I loved it. I went back and watched the first one. But so ends Before Sunset. And
we were so excited to watch. When that finished, we were both like, oh, we have to watch 3.
Yes.
Cannot wait to just, because again, something special is taken. I'm not criticizing this. I'm saying like it's just an inherent thing in storytelling. The power of leaving that unspoken is more enriching to me. Like, because I think it was 2 weeks from when we watched the third one. It was almost like we were still talking about it for days and days. And there's something really powerful about like not knowing. I know there's a third film, but you inherently take something away when you make it. I can still go and watch 2 now and enjoy that ending for all the reasons we said. But there is something about if you had just left it.
Yeah.
I love that there's a third one.
Yes.
I love there to be a fourth one. I know they're not, but like it's that the way they end their stories is just really powerful.
Again,
the third one ends differently, which we'll talk about.
But yeah, so just on the second, I think for me it's my favorite because I love the real-time tension. I love, like I said, that whole scene in the car. I just love this, like, oh my God, but you've got to get on a plane, but you two love it.
What a way to make a romantic spectacle without doing a romantic spectacle. Like you've just had a conversation which structure is really similar. They talk about a lot of the same things, but from a new perspective. But that just walking up the stairs quietly and getting into the apartment felt like the guy running through the terminal.
Yes.
It felt as tense, and it was having my heart beating in just the same effect as like the end of Love Actually.
Because it's relative, I totally get it. So it ends brilliantly, and for a long time that was it. It was just before sunrise and before sunset, and you had a lovely, double bill there. Mm-hmm. And then you get the third, and I think final. We'll talk about this, but I hope final one of the trilogy.
Would work as a final.
Yes, which is Before Midnight, and Before Midnight picks up again 9 years later, and it's set in Greece. And of the first 5 minutes, I mean, because I really didn't want to know. I didn't want to look at the third one too much. It begins and we're in Greece, and it's Jesse talking with his son, who he mentioned, Henry. Mm-hmm. So Henry was 4 in the process, so now he's like 13, 14. And
at the airport,
Henry's flying back to the US on his own, and he's saying goodbye. And they have this chat at the airport. They talk about like life, and then he says goodbye. And it's already early on. It's only 5 minutes in, but it's like this really sad bit where he has to see his son go.
Yeah, it's like longing for connection. And
and he's sad. And also, like, there's the male thing. Like, obviously, Jesse sees a part of his young self in his son. And then Jesse walks outside. All this time I'm thinking, but where the fuck is Celine? Okay, are you guys together or what? And he walks outside, and Celine is there, and in the back of the car are their 2 twins they have together. So you're like, well, okay, we're 9 years later.
It's a really huge smile on your face because you're like, tell me everything.
Also, can I just say that Before Midnight opens in... it's filmed in Kalamata Airport, right?
Yeah.
Look, I love the Before films. I had been to Kalamata Airport twice before I realised that it was used in that film.
Oh,
when I rewatched it, it was like Kalamata. I was like, oh my, I've fucking been there.
You're like Leonardo DiCaprio.
Anyway, so then they although not as confined to a geographical location as like the first two, you still get the long extended periods of conversation. But instead of
weekend, really, 2 days,
maybe 2 nights, you have instead of them talking, the first 15 minutes of them driving and talking, and they're talking about Celine's career and Jesse's career, and Jesse, is always conflicted about his son. He wishes he was there more. And the idea, the spectre of maybe going back to America is sort of looming over that, and which Celine is not comfortable about. You get hints of tension which comes out later about how Henry's mother views Celine, and obviously what happened. What we're told later is that before sunset, after it faded to black, they just fucking slept with each other for like 2 days straight. Yeah. And he left his wife and had this massive affair and started a new life, started a family,
America, away from his son,
and they're staying at the home of a professor or
writer in literature. Yeah.
And so the first, third, you get typical Before stuff. You have Jesse, like I said, pitching an idea he has for a book about, which again is about, I think, memory or some like people with selective traits. I can't quite remember. And you have this dinner scene, which is really interesting because you have older people there, like this professor and his friend.
Love.
And you have this young love. And there's this bit where
there's a couple to compare us with as well.
There's this young couple who, from different locations, they've fallen in love. And very reminiscent of Jesse and Celine in Before Sunrise. And Jesse and Celine can tell this as well. And they say, like, how do you stay in touch? And they talk about Skype, right? And they talk about, how I fall asleep with Skype there. And you just get this, you sense that Jesse and Celine are aware of, like, we're born in the wrong era. Our relationship, how different would our relationship have turned out if we had Skype, or been able to communicate so directly? That idea that Jesse says at the beginning of Before Sunrise about the videotapes, sending them all around the world, like how outdated that was.
And they really harbour their pain of memory and lost time onto their children. Like Jesse obviously wants his son to have the best time and spend time with his son. And there's this moment where the twins are in the car and they're sleeping, and they're like, there are these huge ruins that they promised they'd wake them up for. But it's like, should we? And it's like, yeah, well, they're never going to see it again. And no, just let them sleep and have a good holiday. No, but like we should kind of like show them. There's this funny joke when they wake up and they lie about it, like, they were closed.
Yeah.
Come back to it. But there is that, you can tell they're like, adopting their neuroses, bringing their neuroses onto their children and how they feel about it.
But the interesting thing about they have this dinner, and so there's that, but also there's this the older professor and his wife, and there's this conversation about, again, the ephemerality of time, about how like a sunrise and a sunset, we appear and we disappear, everything's ephemeral. And she talks about she lost her husband, and she's like, I can't really remember his face, and again, there's this sense, oh my God, like time passes and ages, and the whole thing undercutting Before Midnight is like, if the first one was like this romantic encounter that you this brief encounter you have over 24 hours, and the second one is like, what if you got a second chance with the one that got away? The third one is a much sort of deeper, complex idea, which is, okay, you got it, you got the girl, but what now? Can you escape being the romantic? The Before Sunrise opens with that middle-aged couple arguing. Can Jesse and Celine escape from being that couple themselves, just because they love each other and had that passion?
Third one's also like, okay, great, now you're here, and what is love?
Yeah,
it's also like literally going to try and tell you what love is.
And they so just the main premise, I'll just get there, is that the professor, they've booked Jesse and Celine an evening in a hotel.
The film starts when they start walking and talking, and I was like, here we are, we're back.
So they put them an evening in a hotel so they can spend some time to each other away from the kids, and they go, okay, great, and they have this lovely like walking, talking, very Jesse and Celine chat through the Greek town, and they arrive at the hotel, and there's the bit with the book signing, and they go into the room, and it's all going fine, and they start to get intimate, and then there's a call that Henry calls Celine to say that he's arrived in London and he's going to have a change in his flight and is flying home, and it's just like the slightest like Celine is like half undressed, and it's like the smallest of things, and it just tips, and then what you get for most of the rest of the film is this huge argument between Jesse and Celine, which is why the third one is often the most difficult to watch. But I will say also some of the most funniest lines are in the third as well, with the argument. And the argument is about aging. It's about
where you should be. What's to do the right
priority,
thing by your kids? Like, who are we and what do we want? How come we don't know what we want? How come you don't know exactly what I want?
And even
I'm not saying this. Well, you have said it. You've said it consistently over the years, and now it's like it's also one of those things you don't think are a problem in a relationship, and then all of a sudden it actually just catches up with you really quickly, and it's the biggest problem in the world.
And it's like also gets deeper about like, well, you had eyes for that other person that one time, and like I know that you went to that thing, and I didn't ask any questions, and both of them,
and like this is more about the ending, but in a less complex film or in a simpler film, that fight would be the death ring of most on-screen relationships. But actually, that is a really normal argument. It's a really like common thing to argue about, or it's a really common way to argue.
Well,
I think so.
I agree. It's common to argue, but I don't know. There's something about how it gets so vitriolic between them. I mean, she walks out at him and says, "I know what the problem is. I just don't love you anymore."
Yeah,
and he's sat alone with the wine that's unopened, and it's like
the intimacy that kind of failed to happen. There's also this idea that when you're older, you have to like schedule your intimacy. Like, we're going to go book a hotel so like we can have sex and probably just get away from our kids. There's another quote which is really great. I can't remember which one this is from, which is, I think I can really fall in love when I know everything about someone, the way he's going to part his hair, which shirt he's going to wear that day, knowing the exact story he'll tell in a given situation. I'm sure that's when I know I'm really in love. Wow. It's like the predictability of it. If that's gone, do you lose something?
And they almost like know each other too well. And Celine has this really funny line where she's like, now the only time where I get to have my own thoughts is when I take a shit. I'm starting to associate my own thoughts with the smell of shit. And it's true. And there's the whole thing about like how, she hates, understandably, that she's fallen into like the typical maternal role. She's a strong feminist, and she's annoyed that Jesse has gets to be the writer, gets to be the creative, and gets to be the fun father. And there's that tension there. And it's all about time and getting older. And the way it ends, I'm sorry if I'm just, by the way, jump in at any point, but like, you have this argument, and then it ends with Celine waiting on the river, on the seafront at a bar. She's fuming
at sunset.
The sunset's earlier on. Do you remember? Because they're watching it. That's when he's like, there it goes. Right, and then now it's it's before midnight. And he walks up to her, and it's like Jesse has had to. There's this thing about how Jesse uses fiction, and he puts on this act basically, and he massively calls back to the first film when he's like, "I'm a time traveler. Hi, I'm from summer of '94. You might remember me. I wanted to come and tell you that I've got a time machine, and I'm here to save you from all the bullshit of life and all that stuff." And she hates it. She doesn't engage at all, and then he so you've seen it more recently than me, so correct me if I'm wrong, but then like he breaks, and I love it. He like puts his things down. He's like, I am giving you my whole life. I've got nothing else to give. And then like she starts to engage back, and they just agree they start to engage in a little fantasy, right? And it's almost like that. It's a bit like what happened with the White Lotus when we talked about that. Like you almost have to lie to yourself and have little fictions in order to sustain it. I don't know. How did you read that?
It's like another, in so many ways, it's another ending where you're like, oh, I wonder what happens. Do they stay together? Do they move to America? Like, is that fight going to be the end of it? But it's kind of like, we could make a fourth, right?
You could, yes.
You could make a fourth and pick up. But the message of it to me is that they are in love.
Yeah.
And that love probably does exist, but it's really imperfect and it's always going to be flawed. And you could pick up with these characters in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years.
And it won't get any better.
And it won't get any better. It reminds you that we are, as people, still forever trying to remove the Disneyification of how we see our lives. We're constantly picturing, when we perceive our future to be, I'll have sorted it out by then. I'll be like, I'll have sorted it. I'll just be like, and I'll be older and everything will be fine. And that I'll have like my ending. When really life, you speak to anyone at any stage of life, you're always doing things, always fixing, always improving. And it's, a relationship is not, at least for me, my interpretation of these two, it's not defined by how much they fight or how different they are. It's the fact that they, Jesse went to go back and try and fix it.
Yeah.
And that is the important one. And he's like, I'm still, even though we think differently, he still wanted to come back to her and be with her. And he's like, I'm giving you my whole life. Is that not enough? Which is the most like romantic gesture ever.
I know. And also that idea that you really just accumulate flaws throughout your whole life. Like, there's something about like the blank slate perfection of the first one, and then the second one it's starting to creep in when it's like, okay, but he's married and they didn't meet up, and then this one it's like, well, there's so many things getting in the way that's just conflicting on view. But I love how each one ends. You could argue that each one ends when you don't know whether they're going to stay together. You don't know whether they're going to be together.
Every time.
The first one ends, obviously we don't know whether they're going to see each other again. The second one ends, who knows? And the third one, they could easily fall apart.
And it's another thing about relationships and marriage is that even if they did break up, it doesn't mean that the relationship failed. It's like living and raising kids and having 20 years of a relationship assuming it's happy. That's not a failed relationship. But I still think we perceive people who get divorced in their 50s and 60s as like a failed marriage. It's like, no, if you were together for 20 years and you raised family, just because you fought, it doesn't mean that you lost something. They probably experienced something incredible. And it's like such a mature and honest way to talk about people who are in love. It's not really, I don't think it's been captured in that way before. And it's just, I'm sure I'll have a new meaning for it maybe when I'm older and when I have kids.
Well, that brings us to what we kind of touched upon last year with the show, with the films, is that your experience with those films now will change because those films not only age in time, we are going to get further and further away from when those films were made, but you change in time. So I remember, I was 20 when I watched the first one, so I had much more in common with the first one. And now I'm, I'm now before sunset age, basically. Yeah. And I can see it now. Even though we can get a lot out of watching Before Midnight, I know the older I get, the more raw and real that film will be. And it's like when I saw it at Somerset House, and I got the bus home afterwards, there was people talking at the bus stop, and they were saying, "What did you think?" And she was like, "Well, when I was younger, I used to love the first one, but now I find them a little bit annoying, and I actually relate much more to
Jesse especially a little bit annoying.
Yeah,
it's fine.
Totally. So on the whole,
in the third one, didn't find Jesse annoying. He's much like more grounded and sad, and he's so different to his original character, whereas Celine's much more consistent.
So there you have it. So then we arrive at the end of this trilogy, and you kind of look at it, and like, it's a huge. What I love is that whole thing about time, like the ephemerality of it, but also like the concept of time. Like Linklater's study of time in this, for me, is as interesting as any sci-fi, any fucking Interstellar or anything like that. Also, just on the Linklater point, he made these films. He made the Before Sunset and Before Midnight and a couple of other films while he was making Boyhood in the background, which obviously is his other massive study of time. Hats off to you, mate. Brilliant. And Richard Linklater is a really interesting director. If anyone wants to read up on him, because he's this whole he's Texan. He's got this kind of slacker. He obviously made the film Slacker, and he has this whole kind of he's like the college dorm mate you have, or like the side character in a comedy who likes to read all night long and watch films, but he's kind of like cool but interesting, and you never expect to be a film director, but he is. I love him as an interesting, like the way he talks and the way his approach to stuff is brilliant. So on the whole, you are
really enjoyed.
I'm glad.
I'm still. I still feel like the third film and the second and third film haven't really rinsed off me yet. It's still being processed. And I think the one that sticks with me a lot is the argument in 3. And I'm like, what is that argument? And the more I think about it, I'm like, it's a normal argument.
Yeah.
I don't think that is like the be all end all of them.
Just how clever as well that they know that the audience is looking for Jesse and Celine doing their walking and talking, which gives them a bit. And then it's like, but this is what really is going to happen. We're going to flip what you think is going to happen.
And all of a sudden, she decides that the hotel room is disgusting.
Yeah.
I hate hotel rooms; they're awful. He's like, oh no, it's kind of nice. Like, but if you have an argument with the room, it's like. The thing that gets smashed.
And he's like, you are the mayor of Crazy Town right now.
The classic, like calling a feminist a neurotic woman. Like, you've gone down. My main point is that leaving that, I was like, I need to go back and watch the cover shot, not the cover shots, but like the reaction to the people who were talking. Because I feel like I've definitely only seen 50% of them.
There are so many... but if you want to like explore more about, there's just so many callbacks and like, links between the two. Like I said, like the whole idea of time travel and memory, and like you realize they are stitching together this story. And why I think what I love about this as a trilogy is that an unintentional trilogy, like I said before, that he wasn't intending to make, is actually it's almost. It's not a trilogy, it's a triptych for me. It's one story told across 3 films. Isn't that amazing? It's like, I don't look at it as 3 distinct things. It's like, no, it's part 1, part 2, part 3.
Yeah.
And it's only in the 3 of them clicking together. And it's like, I'll never know what it was like to know Before Sunrise on its own, like you were saying. Or Before Sunrise, Before Sunset on its own. There have only ever been a trilogy for me. But together, you see that. Because Before Sunset makes Before Sunrise more interesting. And Before Midnight makes Before the previous 2 more interesting. All of them are... It raises the value and intrigue of all those films together. The meaning is like heightened when you have
I'd kill to see discussions of like the 3, because I know that Ethan Hawke and Judy Delpy will have writing credits on 2 and 3. I would have loved to have seen them workshopping scenes, like the car scene in 3. Like when you're showing them that, they actually they are together and they do have kids, the authenticity of how they engage with each other felt so real.
Yeah.
It's very obvious to say that it's very realistic, grounded films, but them like talking about just their problems and the clothes they're wearing and how they interact with their kids, I was like, I really believe that these characters, I say it all the time, exist outside of the frame of the film you're watching. That to me is like, I believe that like when I look away, they're still cracking on. I believe that right now, it's been 10 years,
they're somewhere,
everything's out there. I don't know what's going on, but I believe they're out there somewhere.
Yeah.
It's such a great feeling. Oh, watch it with a partner if you can.
Yes.
Or a friend, or even a friend you've known for years.
Yeah. Just think about the writing process with all of Linklater stuff. When the dialogue looks this natural and looks this casual, you almost want to say this is improvised, but it's not. It's the opposite. No. It's like actually they probably rehearse. They rehearse a lot of it, and then they get in and they hone that. And obviously in the writing process as well, you've got this synergy between acting and writing, and then they get on screen. But I wanted to bring up my fandom here, just because while we're talking about it, I mean, sorry if you're listening to this, I will try and audio describe it. The first is my slightly faded Criterion Collection version of the Before trilogy.
Was I there when you got gifted this?
You were.
Yes.
My girlfriend gave me this, and I say this to her now, and I say it now. This is probably the best thing I own. Okay, this is my
with gloves.
Absolutely. So this is not an ad for the Criterion Collection. This is the Before trilogy featuring all 3 inside, beautifully.
It looks like
together.
an old CD collection from. With beautifully like oil paintings of the
so you get these
films.
3 distinct covers for each single one, each one having different bonus features.
The cover looking like a sort of tea-stained egg yolk.
Yeah. And you have inside a booklet.
Gorgeous black and white.
And this booklet, which look, you open it up and it's got the Before trilogy, and you have on the first one, it's got, Before Sunset and Before Sunrise and all the cast of players.
Get the disc and dip it in avocado.
And you have an essay that comes with it. And what I love about this Criterion collection of these 3 films together is what I love about, I mean, like all Criterion stuff, but it's that they have taken as much care and detail with these films. They clearly care about these films as much as I do. And it's so nice to physically, tangibly hold something.
Something we have really lost in... Look, the digital age is in so many ways more convenient, easier, cheaper.
How do you think people listen to the show?
Yeah, buying our VHS. But we have lost so much to do with physically holding something and being able to flick through. Like for me, it was games. When you used to buy a game and you would have the manual and I'd pop the disc open and I would like look through just the instructions. Yeah. And now like you don't get any of that. And it's a shame. Like beautifully presented packages of films that make you feel like you've really done something special by watching it is always lovely.
So I wanted to bring that because I wanted to be like, this is how much I love these films. I treasure this Criterion copy of it.
And it sits very proudly on George's shelf in his bedroom.
Yep.
If you ever get the chance to go to George's house.
That's my living room actually.
It's graduated.
It's up there with the Tarkovsky. It's on the film shelf with all my other Criterions.
Yeah. We should do a Tarkovsky one.
I should just do like, hey, welcome to my crib. This is my.
You want to read something? Oh yeah, just this shelf over here.
I also brought with me the screenplay of Before Sunrise and Before Sunset, which you can buy as one whole booklet, and I have my bookmark in there from where I clearly got into reading Before Sunset. There's dialogue in there that didn't make it into the film, but
I'd love to. It'd be a great read.
Yeah, because it's so dexterous. I love it. Look, I think when I talk about these films, like it is like the apex, like core thing for me. It reminds me of like why I like cinema and why I love it. Because when I watch these films, when I talk about these films, I just go somewhere else. It is like sublime. I'm not on this ethereal plane anymore. I am somewhere else, and my heart soars when I watch these films, and I'm beaming. I also
think they're good to recommend. They're good. They're very approachable for almost anyone.
Yes,
they're nice and short. I think like it's like digestible chapters.
Yes,
it's very easy to be like, watch it. It's not like some wanky 3.5 hour. It's not like Brussels.
What
was it? Gene Dealman.
Gene Dealman. Yeah.
Which was the #1 film according to BFI. You know what I mean? Like
that.
We looked at that. I'm like, I'm not sure I fancy it, even though it's the #1.
You're right. I mean, like that's why I ever since I've been known these films, I've always been recommending them, like I have done on this show, and because they're chopped, they're intelligent, they're interesting, they're full of creative ideas
over time, as you do.
But they are accessible. It's just two people talking, and that is like it's pure cinema for me. As much as Christopher Nolan rendering a black hole.
Also, it's rare for someone to say like, "Oh, this romance film."
Yes.
Not to reduce it to that, but like this romance film is actually my favorite. It's not like deep sci-fi or 2001 or like Citizen Kane it's actually quite unorthodox to be saying like these are actually some of the most special films to me. Here's why. And I just noticed now you're talking about the patina of time, and that's what's happened with them being sat on my bookcase, because I have that facing outwards. I have it facing outwards because I like to look at the front cover, and I can see it faded. But look at the number, the rating. That's all the smoking.
The colours out of it. Anyway, that was our overview and our sort of dissection of the Before films.
I hope you enjoyed it.
I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you've seen them. I hope you have some thoughts on them. Please let us know.
And if you do, as a result of this podcast, go and watch them based on our recommendation, please let us know what you thought. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I would personally love it. I'm happy for them not to make any more. I'm happy with that. It's a perfect thing. Like the Toy Stories, I would have loved it if they kept it at 3.
Me too.
They could easily make another one, but I'm happy for them to keep it like that. James, do you have anything else to say about the films before we sign off?
I really enjoyed them. I can't wait to watch. I can't wait to re-watch them and see the 50% I feel like I've missed.
Fantastic. Thank you again for going to watch them. I really appreciate it. And now, whenever we watch them in the future, we have this thing I can refer to it and say, James, you've seen them now.
The Before films.
Thank you very much for listening to this bonus episode of Pulp Kitchen.
Let us know if you would like us to do this for another sequence series, couple of films, or a couple of films from a director's work. We've mentioned trying to maybe do something on Tarkovsky if we can find the time, or another director, or maybe like one of our black holes, our gaps,
blind spots.
Blind spots. Yeah. See what I did there? And we'd love to do them if we've got the time and we can sit down and have this conversation. But as always, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much. Thank you, and see you with our normal episode next week.
Fabelmans, Babylon next week for the next episode.
Time to get excited. Goodbye.
See you next week.